The wedding photographs smiled brighter than I ever could. In every frame, Emily beamed as if her world had finally aligned, while I stood beside her, performing the role of a husband with practiced ease. My lips stretched into polite shapes, my hand tightened on hers, yet beneath the surface, I was a hollow man. The applause of friends and family still rang in my ears, but it sounded like the echo of someone else's life. Emily was radiant that day, every detail of her dress chosen with the devotion of a woman in love. She deserved someone who met her joy with equal fervor. Instead, she had me, Daniel, 29 years old, groom by title, impostor by truth. I had not married her out of malice. I had married her because expectation weighed heavier than honesty. My parents' approving nods, her parents' glowing pride, the whispers of tradition, all had pressed me into the vow that on the first night, I tried to summon affection into passion, as though desire could be willed into existence. Emily lay beside me, tender and hopeful, her touch soft, her voice warm with promises of forever. But inside me, a cold distance widened. I kissed her, I whispered assurances, yet the act was lifeless, as if I were translating a language I had never truly learned. She noticed, though she said nothing. Instead, she smiled gently, attributing my restraint to nerves, not to the deeper fracture I carried. The second day of marriage arrived with rituals of ordinary life. Emily moved about our small flat, humming as she arranged the wedding gifts, her joy bubbling in domestic rhythms. I drifted through the space like a ghost, nodding, smiling when required, and secretly suffocating under the weight of a life I had chosen for all the wrong reasons. It was then that James appeared. Emily's older brother knocked on our door with the casual charm of someone entirely at ease with himself. He was 27, broad-shouldered, with a grin that seemed to disarm any room he entered. "Thought I'd check on the newlyweds," he said, stepping in with 2 bottles of wine. Emily embraced him happily, her delight unfeigned, and for a moment I watched them with a pang of envy. Not envy of their bond as siblings, but envy of the ease with which James existed, confident, unburdened, authentic. His presence filled the room without effort, while I felt perpetually small within my own skin. Our first conversation was unremarkable, sports, work, casual banter, but beneath it, a current stirred. When James laughed, his eyes lingered on mine a fraction too long. When his hand brushed against my shoulder in a brotherly gesture, a jolt ran through me, startling in its intensity. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was the restless trick of a lonely heart, but denial felt thin against the pulse of attraction I could not name aloud. Emily, oblivious, excused herself to fetch glasses for the wine. James leaned back in his chair, casual and relaxed. "So, Daniel," he said, voice warm but edged with curiosity, "how's married life treating you so far?" The question was innocent, yet it landed like a challenge. For a fleeting second, I saw something sharper in his gaze, as though he suspected the hollowness I carried. My answer was automatic: "It's good, really good," but my throat tightened around the lie. He nodded, sipping from the bottle before Emily returned, his expression unreadable. The evening passed in easy conversation, laughter filling the gaps where truth dared not reside. Still, I felt something invisible tethering me to James, a thread woven not of words but of silent recognition. He spoke of family gatherings, of future dinners, of how glad he was to welcome me as a brother. Each declaration pressed against me, both comforting and dangerous. As he prepared to leave, James clasped my shoulder once more. His grip was firm, his smile casual, but his eyes flickered with something else, a spark, a knowing, or perhaps my own longing projected back at me. Emily laughed at some final joke, unaware of the silent exchange passing between us. When the door closed behind him, I stood rooted in place, unsettled. The air he left behind felt charged, as though he had carried away a piece of my composure. Emily slipped her arm around me, resting her head against my chest, blissfully content. I held her, my smile automatic, but my mind replayed the way James's eyes had lingered, the weight of his touch. That night, as Emily drifted into sleep beside me, I stared at the ceiling in silence. The truth I had buried for years pressed against my ribs like a secret clawing its way out. And in that stillness, I knew the wedding vows I had spoken were already trembling, fragile as glass beneath the first strike of desire. The days after that night blurred together, yet the memory refused to fade. I went about my routines, classes, work, messages with friends, but Daniel was always there in the back of my mind. Every quiet moment became an invitation to replay what had happened, to relive the way his voice dipped when he whispered, "Stay." That I told myself distance was the only answer. If I avoided Liam's house, avoided Daniel, maybe the feelings would dull, and the guilt would finally loosen its grip. For 2 weeks I managed it, offering excuses whenever Liam suggested hanging out, claiming deadlines or family obligations. He didn't question it much, though a faint flicker of disappointment crossed his face each time. That disappointment cut deeper than I expected, but temptation has a way of finding cracks. One evening, my phone buzzed with a message I shouldn't have opened. Daniel's name lit the screen. "You've been quiet. Are you avoiding me?" I stared at it for a long time, every instinct urging me to delete it, to pretend I hadn't seen it. Yet my fingers betrayed me. "I thought it was better this way," I typed, then quickly added, "for everyone." His reply came fast, "Then why did you answer?" I had no response. He was right, of course. If I truly wanted to cut ties, I wouldn't have replied at all. That small act of weakness opened the door again, and Daniel knew it. 2 nights later, Liam invited me over for dinner. Against my better judgment, I said yes. When I arrived, the house felt the same as it always had, warm, familiar, deceptively safe. Liam was busy in the kitchen, focused on chopping vegetables, his usual chatter filling the space. And then Daniel appeared in the doorway, eyes locking on me for just a moment too long. The evening unfolded in the usual rhythm, laughter at the dinner table, harmless banter, Liam oblivious to the current beneath the surface. But when he left the room to grab something upstairs, the silence that followed was unbearable. "You don't mean to stay away," Daniel murmured, stepping closer. "You wouldn't be here otherwise." "Daniel," I whispered, panic rising. "This can't keep happening. It's not fair to Liam." "It's not fair to who?" he pressed, his voice low. "To me. To you. Or to the person who doesn't even see you the way I do." The words cut deep. My resolve wavered, torn between what was right and what I wanted. He leaned in slightly, his presence overwhelming, his gaze demanding an answer I couldn't give. Liam's footsteps upstairs snapped me back to reality. I stepped away quickly, pretending to examine something on the counter, heart racing. When Liam returned, he found us as he'd left us, 2 people sharing the same space, nothing more, but everything had changed again. That night, I stayed later than I should have. Liam eventually yawned his way to bed, leaving Daniel and me alone in the living room. The silence stretched, heavy and charged. Daniel reached for my hand once more, his touch familiar now, dangerous and magnetic. "You don't have to be afraid," he whispered. "I'm terrified," I admitted, surprising myself with the honesty that he didn't let go. "Good. That means it matters." The words settled between us like a promise and a threat at once. I pulled my hand back, forcing myself to leave, but as I walked out into the cool night, my chest was burning with a truth I couldn't deny. I didn't want this to end, no matter how much I should, and with every step away from that house, I knew the spiral had only just begun. The morning after blurred into ordinary motions, yet nothing felt ordinary to Ethan. He moved through the cabin with deliberate calm, helping Ryan clear dishes, laughing at stories that rolled too easily from his friend's tongue. But beneath every word, beneath every breath, a secret pulsed between him and Mark, silent and undeniable. Mark behaved as though nothing had happened. His voice carried the same measured tone, his posture as steady as ever. He asked Ryan about his classes, about the next football practice, about things that belonged in the safe rhythm of father and son. To Ethan, however, every glance felt heavy, every word a reminder of the night they had crossed a line. When Ryan left to fetch more firewood, the silence between Ethan and Mark returned, unspoken yet thick. Mark busied himself with the coffee pot, pouring dark liquid into 2 mugs. He slid one toward Ethan without a word. Their fingers did not touch this time, but the absence of contact made the memory of it sharper. Ethan stared into the swirling steam, forcing his voice steady. "Do you regret it?" Mark's hand stilled on the counter. He did not look up immediately. When he finally did, his eyes were cautious, weighed down by something Ethan couldn't read fully. "I don't regret feeling it," he said at last. "But I regret what it means." Ethan swallowed. The words cut more deeply than silence would have. "Because of Ryan." "Because of everything," Mark corrected, his jaw tightening. "This isn't a road either of us can walk without consequence." The conversation ended as Ryan returned, arms full of wood, breaking the fragile honesty. Ethan forced a smile, but his stomach coiled tight. He told himself he could bear it, that the memory of one night would fade with distance. Yet every shared glance across the room told him otherwise. The day unfolded in fragments. They hiked along the wet shoreline once the rain eased, Ryan bounding ahead with the energy of someone oblivious to shadows. Mark trailed behind, steady and quiet, and Ethan found himself caught in the middle, torn between loyalty and longing. At one point, Ryan climbed a fallen log, balancing precariously as he shouted some challenge back to Ethan. Ethan laughed, but his eyes shifted instinctively toward Mark, who watched his son with a fondness softened by fatigue. Their gazes met for only a second before Mark looked away, but in that instant Ethan felt the gravity of what they shared, something unspeakable, something that would not vanish. That night, the cabin was quieter. Ryan stayed up late on his phone, stretched out on his bed upstairs. Ethan sat alone in the living room, staring at the dim firelight, waiting without admitting to himself what he was waiting for. Mark appeared at the doorway, his presence filling the room even before he spoke. He leaned against the frame, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You should try to sleep," Mark said. "I can't," Ethan admitted. For a long moment, neither moved. The unspoken promise of the previous night hung between them, dangerous and magnetic. Mark finally stepped closer, lowering his voice. "This can't become a habit. You know that." Ethan nodded, though the ache in his chest deepened. "But you still came." Mark's silence was answer enough. He sat across from Ethan, the distance deliberate this time. His eyes lingered, but his hands stayed firmly in his lap. "I need you to understand," he said, his voice carrying both sternness and softness. "What happened, it can't define you. Or me." It was a moment, not a path. Ethan nodded again, though the words only tangled further in his mind. He wanted to believe him, yet every glance, every pause, every heartbeat told him the storm wasn't over, it had only changed form. When Ryan's footsteps creaked above, both men fell silent. The moment dissolved into stillness, leaving only the fire to fill the space. Mark rose first, retreating toward the hall without another word. Ethan sat alone, the embers glowing faintly, his thoughts louder than the crackle of wood. He knew the weekend would end, the cabin would empty, and life would resume. But something had been carved into him, into them both, and though he didn't know where it would lead, he knew this wasn't an ending. It was only the beginning of a silence they would carry, one secret, 2 hearts, and a storm that refused to pass. By the 3rd week of our marriage, the rhythm of deceit had already become routine. Emily believed she was building a life with me. In truth, I was building 2. Each smile I gave her was shadowed by another reserved for James. Each embrace was measured, knowing that soon enough, I would surrender myself again to the man I could not resist. James seemed unshaken by the weight of our secret. If anything, he thrived on it. He sought me out with a quiet confidence, crafting excuses to visit, finding reasons to linger when Emily left the room. His glances were brazen now, his touches deliberate. Where I felt guilt, he seemed to feel only triumph, as though seducing his sister's husband was proof of his power over me, and yet, I could not blame him alone. I was no unwilling captive. I had made my choice, again and again, every time I answered his call, every time I let his presence undo me. With him, I felt unmasked. With Emily, I played a part one could no longer sustain. One evening, Emily asked me to join her for dinner with her parents. I agreed, but the thought of sitting across from them, pretending devotion to their daughter while carrying the weight of my treachery, made me restless. I told her I had work to finish, that I would join later. She left with a kiss on my cheek, her faith unwavering. The moment the door closed, James arrived. He did not knock timidly or hide in shadows, he entered as if he belonged. His confidence terrified me because it mirrored my own weakening resolve. We barely spoke before falling into each other's arms, driven less by tenderness than by urgency. The fear of discovery seemed to fuel us, making every kiss sharper, every touch more reckless. Afterward, as I sat catching my breath, James studied me with a look that pierced deeper than his touch. "You're wasting yourself," he said flatly. "She'll never give you what you want. Only I can." His words echoed long after he left. They haunted me when I joined Emily at her parents' dinner table, when I forced myself to smile at conversations about future plans, children, holidays. The idea of fatherhood, of building a family with her, felt like a role scripted for another man entirely. I laughed where I should, nodded where it was expected, but inside, James's voice repeated like a mantra, "Only I can." Emily's trust became a knife with every kindness she offered. She spoke proudly of how well I fit into their family, how James seemed to admire me. Her pride in our closeness, her joy in my acceptance, it was unbearable. She had no idea she was celebrating her own betrayal. That night, I lay awake again, Emily curled against me, her breathing steady, her trust intact. My mind replayed James's words, his hands, his certainty. I wondered if this was love or simply obsession, if my soul recognized him as its truth, or if I was simply drunk on the danger of it all. The days blurred into weeks, and with them came a growing sense of inevitability. I began to see the fracture line clearly, the life Emily believed in, and the life James and I carved in secret. One would have to shatter. I told myself I could control it, that I could balance both without consequence. But deep down, I knew secrets rot from the inside out. One evening, as Emily spoke about redecorating the apartment, she caught my hand and said softly, "I feel so lucky, Daniel. You and James get along so well, it makes me happy." Her words pierced me deeper than any accusation could. For a fleeting moment, I nearly confessed everything, nearly tore down the fragile world she cherished. But I bit the truth back, smiling as though her happiness wasn't built on lies. Later that night, as I stared at the ceiling once more, I realized I had become addicted not only to James but to the deception itself. The secrecy gave me a sense of control, a power over two lives that could not coexist. Yet the cost was mounting that I did not know how long I could keep the facade. All I knew was this: I had already crossed too far to turn back. And the day the truth surfaced, because I knew it would, none of us would emerge unchanged.